I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. All right, joining me now in just a second is someone who has been a big supporter of our platform here and someone whose work I have been trying to support for a good amount of time now. Uh, Her name is Tiny, aka Lisa Gray-Garcia, who, among many other things, is a formerly unhoused, incarcerated poverty scholar, revolutionary journalist, lecturer, poet, visionary, teacher, and single mama of Tiburcio, daughter of a houseless, disabled mama D, and the co-founder of Poor magazine, Prensa POBRE, Poor News Network. And we welcome her back to the program. Tiny Gray-Garcia, welcome back. It's good to see you again.
What's up? What's up? I mix what I like. That's what beautiful.
So we're always happy to hear from you and have you back. And I believe you were here to talk about the latest project that you all have on its way. If I saw correctly, it said pre-order when I was looking at it. So tell us about what it is that you have coming, and what is its context, and why is it important, and what is it meant to do?
Well, first, I got to shout out and start by bringing in our mamas. And I am that poverty scholar, that houseless mama, that houseless daughter. See all those homeless mamas and daughters sleeping in a tent? That's because we can't afford the rent. So, yeah, I rock my jailhouse attire because me and my poor mama did jail time for the poverty crime of being unhoused in this occupied indigenous holler. And I am the melanin challenged daughter of a strong Afro-Boricua mama for without whom there would be no me, a mama soltera and a welfare queen. So yeah, I mix what I like is it, and I'm always blessed to be on these airwaves, and I want to lift up and love up the ancestor women and mamas and papas and bisabuelas and tias and tios who without whom there would be no us. We aren't recognizing enough, that although there's a little pushback now, the first peoples of this land, locally we're calling from Maloney Lashawn territory. Shout out to Sister Karina, Auntie Fui, and all the other warriors out here trying to take back sacred spaces for all of our first peoples, our indigenous peoples, and then all over the world, from Palestine to the Philippines, and in Puerto Rico and beyond, where some of my people are from. I want to specifically yell out because I know that you guys are in so-called Washington D.C., named after the old white colonizer, which is I know so honored, so much of an honor for y'all. No, I'm just playing, but it's also occupied Pequot and Lenape territory out there. So
And
the
I'm out,
work.
and I'm still learning. By the way, just sorry to interrupt, but I'm also specifically in Maryland now,
Okay.
and so we would have to include the Algonquin crew and all of those
I
original
say,
folks as well, right?
I,
Yeah.
I say thank you. Um, and so, the work that we do at Poor Magazine, we're a poor people led, indigenous people led movement. We don't even consider ourselves an organization. I was really excited by your last guest because he was also speaking on, something I call anthro-wrongology. I like to mess with the colonial dominant language, at least one of them, that I was forcibly taught, because I feel that also, if we do that, it starts to unpack all that hegemony, and it's really, really deep how some people are heard and some people aren't. And what we say is no more about us without us. One of my lines from my newest book that's coming out is a poem called Anthropology, Ethnography, Psychology, the study about us without us. Um, so there's a couple things where we do a lot of work in media and liberation media, like I mix what I like, we love you guys, lifting up voices that aren't heard, making sure there's space, but not so that the perpetuation of about us without us continues, but that people speak for themselves, so that we don't have anthropologists and so-called documentarians like Ken Burns and others talking for us, that guess what, we have our own epistemologies, and actually as poor people we've created our own theory. It's called poverty scholarship, poor people led theory, art, words, and tears across Mama Earth. And we put out a textbook, that really is lifting up what we consider survival theory. For poor people, theory is our life, but that's not a monolith. That's many different ways that we survive. And as indigenous peoples, who are again continually colonized and spoken for, studied and researched, picked apart as knowledge production for academia. Guess what? We have our own ways of surviving and thriving, right? So we put out media, and one of those medias is books, and we try to consider ourselves building a poor people archive of theory and time and love and spirit and all the things that sometimes people don't even think of as theory, right? I always say, as a poet and a poverty scholar, I teach through poetry. I'm not going to give you a 20-page assignment that I'm going to lose on my digital, screen. I'm going to give you something to take care of your mama. And I'm a teacher too, we teach in a thing called People School, where we teach folks with race and class, formal education, privilege, how to unpack all that, and how to change the way they move. But the point is, we create a lot of books, and we just released 8 books, and it's pretty exciting. There's powerful writers, and everybody from a disabled raza brother out of Tejas to a sister who's helping young people learn the indigenous language. Shout out to Kai, talks about the missions and the unapologetic Crip lyrics by Valvera, and Lisa Ganser, and so many more. And as well, my book is coming out. It's called The Sidewalk Motel. I've never put a poetry collection together. I just do poetry to live. And really, what my book is trying to do is also give people medicine for transformation. And what I mean by that is that I usually try to give people a different way of looking at things, because I've had to do that as someone who survived poverty and homelessness. In my situation, I had to drop out of formal institutions of learning when I was in the 6th grade and enroll full time in the School of Hard Knocks, where I'm blessed to say I graduated with a PhD in poverty. Not to glamorize, right? Not to lift that up as, oh, that's a good thing, but more to talk about, how do we, as poor folks involved in incarceration and criminalization, who are swept to death, hygienic metaphors about our body, how do we survive? But more importantly, how do we thrive? But I also have the potionary in there, and it is the Poor People's Dictionary, where I remix the colonial language. And I urge folks to check it out, because we need to stop giving these colonial forces that power, right? So I urge everybody to check it out. And these are all available on poorpress.net. We give them away for free to fellow poor people, and we sell them as curriculum for institutions. We urge teachers to use them because we have a lot of children's books in there. I put out a children's book myself on the experience of my mom and me being houseless. Protagonists that people don't see, right? And lifting up the ways that we can survive and thrive. We have a book, how to not call the police ever. We say without abolition from the anti-social work industry, how are we going to have abolition from the police? Because we know that for poor people, they predate on us in many different ways, right? Not only do they kill us, but they continue to snatch our babies. So that's one big thing. And then I'm working on a theater series. So that I just loaded a whole lot of stuff on you there, bruh.
No, it's great. It's impressive. Just I want to back up quickly when you say the approach in poverty scholarship, the theoretical approach. Could you talk a little bit about what that means?
Mm, yeah. Well, it's again, I love I love the work that you do, and other family, Black revolutionary family like my brother Leroy Moore, and others, in the sense that lifting up voices that not only aren't heard, which is really easy to say but not necessarily understood, but really lifting up concepts of how we live and how we liberate without the dominant without the dominant savior. And so what I mean by that is, a lot of my life's work, and I have, the second stanza of that poem is, uh, you know, dismantling our communities so that we can be studied, and then leaving us in rubble. One of the things that occurs, and it's occurred forever, right? These are some of the shifts that are happening now because we've been looking and talking about this. But one of the things that's always occurred is this lie of what I call edumacation. You've got billionaires of all colors and cultures saying, "Oh, I'm going to go open schools in the continent and Mama Africa and save the children and in the global South," and everybody's all excited. They're going to open schools, right? And or we're going to get shoes for people, shoes for the poor children. Now, global South poverty is real. Don't get it twisted. I am not saying that. Um, but what I am saying is that there is a lot of love and life and survivance and thrivance in all poor communities, indigenous communities all across Mama Earth. There's also sacred tradition. There is sacred medicine. Shouts out to my sisters taking back the corporate birthing industry, the white science hospitals and the HELLTH care, Sister Juju and Samsara and Anna Delgado and many more, um, teaching back the ways that we can actually thrive through our own medicine. But what happens in the giant swath of the education industrial complex is that we all began to lose the spirit, the knowledge, the culture that we all actually had. And so we don't even know who we are. We're just caught in the capitalist hamster wheel, uh, living on your deal, as another line of my poems. And a piece about that that's so deep is, you know, it's really hard to bring that back. And it's very complex. And a lot of people are doing a lot of work now on bringing back our indigenous spirits and our knowledge systems. But one of the things that we try to do with poverty scholarship is actually insert poverty survival models as another actual theory, because we believe if we want to be listened to about our own ideas and our own solutions, like homefulness, which is another huge thing, the homefulness handbook is coming out in this series. How to start a poor people led solution to homelessness. How about that? We can get into that in a minute. But the only way we're really feeling like people are actually listening is if we kind of simulate the container, right? So we created this book. And the idea behind that is, again, to lift up not only the voices, but the actual ways, the life ways that poor and indigenous people have thrived, have survived, and continue to. The ultimate um, story, if you will, the hero, if you will, or shero of poverty scholarship is the Sentinelese people who, before Bolsonaro, that evil brute, but before him and even now, when the Savior industrial complex planes would show up to help the Sentinelese people, air quotes, they you know, they would shoot their arrows directly at the plane, which were pretty badass arrows. And, those saviors better get out of town fast or they were going to be shot down. Because the reality is, there is nothing those people can bring them. Nothing. And everything that the world will steal from them, including their knowledge, their spirits, and their power. And so, at the root of poverty scholarship is really bringing that power back, erasing the shame actually enmeshed with this lie of education and AKKdemia and othering that occurs every day.
Right on. Um, another thing that, well, I definitely wanted to get into some of the tactics that you have to deal, that you teach to beyond the theory to survive, and especially given that we're hearing more about the eviction moratorium ending, more evictions happening. There's already tremendous houselessness. We're hearing about all throughout the state of California and all throughout the country. For in fact, people living under bridges, more and more. Just so what is it that you're seeing, and what is the reality beyond what's being reported, even, and then where does the tactical approach, or the practical application of the poverty theory, or scholarship, play? How does it play out?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Well, the real deal is that people's bodies are viewed as trash. And when I say that, I mean that when we use these words like sweeps and clean up, I want to I want to caution your viewers and listeners that those are hygienic metaphors about humans, because the capitalist system, who's now taken everything from us, because if you can't stay on the wheel and become, the Jeff Bezos or the Jeff Bezos wannabe, and if you just even have, as my mama used to say, walk humbly on Mama Earth, you're not going to quote make it, within all of these ways that make it means, in a capitalist system, and I do call it capitalist. But one of the crucial pieces about that is that, after we're swept, and I also want to remind people that these hygienic metaphors are nothing new. Um, Shouts out to, uh, again, Susan Schweik and others who looked all the way back in the settler colonial laws, to, to unpack the ugly laws and all of these ways that poor people's bodies, houseless bodies, disabled bodies, were eradicated, or incarcerated, as a model of quote unquote cleaning up. But really, what they were doing, and this is the backstory that's very important always to pull up, is that they were beginning the plantation nation, the prison system, creating, taking land of indigenous peoples and then criminalizing them, giving them all this, poison, aka the alcohol and the other things that were so readily available, as they always do with poor people, and then incarcerating them for being so-called under the influence. So that entire process has always been here. It has just gotten worse. There has always been multiple laws on the settler colonial books that make it illegal to be houseless or poor in public. It is extremely important that people understand that there's not one or two of these laws. There are multiple in any given city. In San Francisco, it's something like 184 laws on the books that make it illegal to sit, stand, or be while houseless in public. And we all know that those versions of those same laws attack black and brown youth for convening, for the same act of just standing or being together. Um, that in fact that they're all raced and classed. If you're a person of color, we just lost Tyrell Wilson, a humble brother who was just sleeping carefully with all his belongings in a bus shelter in the Klan town called Danville, in one of these many wealth hoarding enclaves that we have all across the United States. Um, and, he was shot for being black and houseless in that town. That is not unusual. It is usual by the police. Luis Gongora, Pat, Stephen Taylor, so many more. But going back to the tactics and this insane eviction moratorium ending, first of all, that boils my blood. I'm a jailhouse lawyer, jailhouse tenant lawyer. I did 3 months in county for the act of being houseless. And so I also have been evicted over 22 times. I taught myself how to survive and navigate the injustice system because that's what poor people do. But in my case, it's not it was the scam lord tenant system. Um, but anyway, you know, the rush to normal, we're gonna all be okay. Let's put that, get rid of that eviction moratorium, bring back the lie of rent. These are acts of violence, right? Because yeah, people who had money and who never stopped having money through the pandemic because they could work at home and all, we know all those things. They're fine. They were paying their rent already. Eviction moratorium doesn't even matter to them. Who does it matter to? It matters to people who are not working because they couldn't get back to work because maybe they were sick. God forbid, maybe they got that COVID and have those long haul. I have several people in our community who are struggling to pay the full rent. It's not that they don't have any, and it's not that they don't pay their rent. When they have it, they give it all to these scam lords. So, what are you doing? You're enforcing and causing massive homelessness. That's and openly, eyes wide open, and everybody's like, yeah. Why? Because private property is a settler colonial lie. And that is what this country is built on. And that is what is upheld as one of the most important pieces. I actually have a poem about unpacking the lie of private property and the owning of Mama Earth. But let me go back. So not only are we losing people, not only are people swept to death, as I say, but since the so-called opening back up moment a couple months back, we have increased these violence called sweeps all across the U.S. And where are people going to go? And so you might say, well, what's the answer, Tiny? Da 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 da. Well, again, the answer lives in our own solutions. And I scream this out metaphorically in everything that I do. Poor people have our own solutions. So let me just open up the Homefulness Handbook, which we're about to drop. It is something we're actually doing. I don't talk about anything I'm not live, walking, or doing. The Homefulness Handbook is showing the model which we're currently building in deep East Oakland, occupied Uchin, Ohlone land, an intentionally blighted poor people color neighborhood that is suffering under the weight of gentrification, you know what I call it. And how do we degentrify our hoods? How do we take back these stolen spaces? How do we lift up our sacred ancestors' burial grounds? Shouts out to Karina and the Ohlone and Segorte Land Trust. How do we do that? By taking back this stolen land. So we teach folks with different forms of resources through People School and inviting all people in. We teach folks about radical redistribution, about the idea that you can't just walk by somebody sleeping on the street, that you are human and they are human, and so therefore you are both connected. And so I call out to all quote unquote billionaires, aka wealth hoarders, aka conscious people realizing they need to move a different way in America, KKK, that we have to practice radical redistribution and something I call community reparations, which is rooted in interdependence. And what we're doing at Homefulness is we're building houses for houseless families, walking shoulder to shoulder with folks who have different forms of race class privilege. They do not tell us what to do with that money. This is a self-determined movement led by poor people for poor people. That's the solution, because we know what we need. We know that you can't just put a roof on it and where problems are going to be solved. That we have that trauma from that street life that you can't over just poof, it's done because you give me a key. And so the politricksters don't have the solutions. We poor people do. And so we're building homefulness right now. The city's trying to stop us and block us because they don't understand us. But we have done everything by the book because we know if we don't, they take it back from us. And we're trying to basically have other people launch similar movements, but we're not the only one. So I want to shout out Cobb on Wood in West Oakland. I want to shout out Where Do We Go Berkeley. I want to shout out the Poor People's Army in Philly, Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign, who take back these stolen houses that have been quote unquote bank abandoned or government abandoned because they're just sitting there. How about that? How about you let them have the homes so that they can fix them up themselves? We have skills. We can take care of ourselves. We need to be listened to. And so one of the pieces about this work and what we're doing and lifting up poverty scholarship is lifting up the idea that poor people led solutions created by us for us and shared with everyone else, but created by us for us, self-determined movements are the solution, and that there are many out there. And there's the disconnect is that the anti-social worker industry, and I'm saying this with love to all the social workers out there. Don't hear me wrong. I love you. I love you because you didn't do that work to make money. You did it because you care for people and you love people. But you're an agent of the state, and I urge you to come to People School. And anyway, all that to say is that the same wheel keeps getting perpetuated. And what I'm worried about, Jared, is that it's increasing, that the corporate clean Starbucksization of this occupied land is increasing. The scarcity models that have killed us all are actually tightening up. And really what's happening is more of us are in the street.
Hmm. I almost don't know what else to say. Other than
What
yeah. Go ahead. I'm
I'd
sorry. What
love
was
to,
that?
well, yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit about our ancestors.
Sure.
So, okay. Because also, I just want to, this is a lot of heavy stuff. And for all your viewers and listeners, I love you for listening because I always, like Leroy says, I make people cry. I'm not just trying to do that. I'm trying to recognize that there is hope, and the hope is already right there in front of you. The hope is even in the micro sharing that people can do. And I have a whole theory that I talk about in poverty scholarship, even about things like panhandling, which you have to get the book to hear that one, but it's very controversial. But it's medicine for your listeners and viewers. Really, the issue is, um, people are also lied to about the scarcity models, right? Um, but I wanted to just lift up ancestors and my work and the sacred shell mounds that are all around us that people see as parks and bike trails and all of these things that were just in stolen indigenous territory. Um, and again, shout out to West Berkeley Shell Mound and all the work of the folks out here, and also Lynn Eagle Feather and folks back east also working on the same thing, Hartman Dietz and many more. But one of the projects that's coming out right now that I'm working on, looking towards 2022, is a theater series because I'm a poet, I'm an actor. That's what I do to survive. I speak also and I teach because I feel like there's several angry ancestor mamas inside of me that are always whispering, always screaming, including my mama, who barely made it out of the torture homes, she used to call it, not foster homes, and orphanages that she was put in as an unwanted mixed race child. Um, but in the state of California in the 70s, over 20,000 women who were called, quote, feeble minded, um, which is just more settler colonial torture terms for neurodivergent, basically poor people. Women had been abused, women had been tortured all their life, and then and or lived with a physical and mental disability, real talk, and were never diagnosed. Were just criminalized or incarcerated or left. More importantly, oftentimes just left or killed. But in the state of California, under Reagan and other of these horrible politricksters, 20,000 women were forcibly sterilized who were neurodivergent and they were called feeble-minded, which is another really interesting piece of poverty scholarship. Oftentimes, these were just women who were depressed. Didn't
This
didn't
sounds like La Operacion, that
right?
documentary about the 70s in Puerto Rico and elsewhere, where women were forcibly sterilized, and it
Mm.
was explicitly stated that Pepsi and other major corporations wanted to reduce the amount of um, uh, the poor population that was being forcibly overcrowded as these companies were taking up most of the land. And they said, if we don't reduce the population through this forced, even unknown sterilization, there will be more potential revolutionaries that will emerge out of that
Uh,
crisis. So they were very clear. So anyway, just there's a great the La Operacion is the documentary I'm talking about. But it's anyway. Sorry, it was just something.
no,
It sounds
please,
just like that. Yeah.
exactly, and thank you for. First of all, yeah, that's a badass documentary, and second of all, exactly, because really, what are you doing? You're essentially killing future generations, right? You're killing people. Um, so that what can you get out of that, right? What is there to be gained? It's a really I love the connection there to the land, because at the end of the day, you're taking people off of their land, or they're taking their generations away, right? You're taking their babies away. We're taking our generations away. We're taking our 7 generations, as we say, in different indigenous culturas. And I just want to lift up. So yeah, so one of the things in state of California, and this happened all over. This happened all over. So don't get it twisted, folks. Um, there was this one particular, because I'm from California, right? That's where my broken family so-called settled on, this occupied land known as quote unquote California. Um, and so there is this sort of rather unknown story. And the specific piece about this group of victims, if you will, of warriors, of women, of mamas, of grandmas, is that most of them, if not all of them, were in these group homes, uh, or they were sleeping on the street. And the interesting thing is that, again, they were caught, because people might remember that Reagan was the one who closed mental hospitals, oftentimes closed most of the ways that so called mentally ill people were being taken care of. A lot of people used to say that's why we have a homeless problem, because they closed the mental hospitals. Well, some of it is true, because all of these folks who were dealing with very severe mental illness and neurodivergence were then just spit out onto the street. And so the crazy part is that oftentimes there was like a whole group of things that occurred in terms of their incarceration, their forced homelessness, their being put in group homes. And one of the first things that happened to them was they were forcibly sterilized against their will, and with the idea and with these diagnoses, right, that weren't even necessarily, nobody even knew if they were real. They were just sort of this massive, oh, they're quote feeble minded. Again, oftentimes women are just dealing with depression, being left or abused, PTSD, survivors of violence, and DV. There's so many different ways that women become silent, and we're immediately targeted as crazy. Um, I have a poem, antisocial workers and case manglers call me crazy, lazy, dumb, and a bum because my knowledge don't come from the institution. I mean, the reality is we also show, if you will, and have our ways of surviving that aren't necessarily recognized by the state, And so, anyway, over 20,000 women, and that's just a broad sketch. There were many, many more, were forcibly sterilized. One of them was my Auntie Ray, and I had the blessing I never really understood until this story came out recently, and this opportunity to do this theater work came. Um, that she was absolutely destroyed by that experience. That actually, what she was going through at that time as being a victim of DV, domestic violence, she was absolutely in a severe depression. She was in abject poverty. She had no way to support herself. And she was disconnected from her family because they were her abusers. And so she was caught in this scenario, like all of these women were. And after that occurred, she really just gave up. She was really walking in catatonia. It's like almost, unable to function, and was houseless for the rest of her life. Um, and it all connects, right? Because as we're looking at this absolute brutality of eugenics that is so enmeshed in this Americlan narrative, right? How do you get rid of a people who were already here, right? How do you get rid of the first peoples of this land? How do you get rid of the people that you forcibly brought over here to build it for you? How do you get rid of the people who you don't want to see because they ruin your cute lawn and your property value? You continually kill, incarcerate, and steal from them everything they have. And then they end up on the street. And then there's going to be a sweep. So these are all connected, right? And so I'm working on this theater piece because the ancestors call out to me all the time. My grandmother was a curandera. She spoke to the other side, as a hustle, but also as real. That's what she did. That's who she was, and I guess I've gotten some of that, and I also follow the Ifa tradition. So I pray to my ancestors all the time, and they've called out to me to do this work. And then my brother Leroy invited me into this whole series that's happening, that's dropping. Shout out to a powerful series of work called Dismantling Eugenics. And it's actually about to start this week, September 28th. If people look on Twitter for Dismantling Eugenics, or you can Google it. And it's a powerful group of folks who are creating art and words and work on this absolute violence of killing people, essentially, and killing a whole world, really, that you don't want to exist, so that you can continue to take and predate. And so that's what it is. My piece, my theater piece, is gonna. I just have a little excerpt in the series called Sterile, and it's based on my Auntie Ray, and it's also based on this my play auntie, who I had in L.A., who was one of the folks who took care of me, and then she joined the street and became what a lot of folks in LA called, we have many in all of our cities, but she was known as the Screaming Woman. And I have a poem in honor of her. It's called 5150 Hold. in my upcoming book and in this piece. And basically, she screams out to someone, no one, maybe who will hear. And it it's a tragic story. I'm not going to lie; it's very sad. Um, Auntie Ray, like my mama, and the screaming woman, her name was Carol. She was Auntie Carol to me. Are women that nobody hears. Are women that are intentionally silenced and are intentionally lost. And I think my life's work is to lift up all of my mamas and my aunties and my sistren, who this happens to, because I feel like that's me too. Maybe like my mama said, you have a little bit more strength. Use it. Get our words out there. So yeah.
Right on. Listen, again, I appreciate you coming through and dropping this on us. And again, we want to encourage. We'll put the link in the show notes here to check out um, poorpress.net and pick up all this work. And then the money that you all generate goes to some collective work as well. Is
Every
could you say just a word about that, just
Yeah,
or
just
two
real
before we get
quick.
out of here?
100% of the quote unquote proceeds of any of the Poor Press books, Poverty Scholarship, How to Not Call Police, the Sidewalk Motel, my books, they all go to building homefulness. All proceeds from the homefulness handbook go to helping other people build homefulness, and or to what we call the Bank of Community Reparations. We're supporting folks right now, over 800 people, with groceries and diapers, the Poor Mama's Diapers Fund, rent, whatever it is. That's what radical redistribution is. It's making sure that whenever you got a little extra, it goes to someone who don't got none. And check that out if you want. You can go to poormagazine.org /rev underscore donor, or just go, Google us, Poor Magazine. We're also on Venmo. We're on Instascam. We're on FaceCrack. We're on Twitter. You can hit me up at Poverty Scholar on Twitter. And I'm always down to speak and teach. I really am, and most importantly, am trying to teach folks with race and class privilege about how to radically redistribute, because we cannot continue to live in this wealth hoarding nation and operate this way.
Right on. Definitely appreciate it. One last thing. I keep meaning to ask you this as well. Could you, when people hear you say homefulness and use that kind of language, I know you've already said you like to challenge the colonial languages.
Yes.
Why is it important in that particular case to make that adjustment when we're talking about
Well,
people without?
yeah.
Yeah.
So people call us the homeless people, like we a monolith, right? Again, and this is my experience. I was houseless with my mama from the age of 11 up to about 22. And the only reason that changed is true. We didn't have no money. How about that? We were po. That was what it was. And then we kept getting evicted because every time, and we worked really hard in a micro business, as vendors on the street, and we could never get enough together to pay the rent and eat. But the point being is that there are many different reasons why folks don't have a home. It ain't who we is. It ain't who we is. Just like you're not who you are because you have a home. It's like, no, we just don't happen to have a roof. And some of us suffer with substance use, and that's real. And some of us suffer with different forms of disabilities. Most of us, and oftentimes we're just in poverty for all kinds of reasons. And so we challenge the way that somehow people have decided, just as you're outside because your lives are exposed, now you can be considered this monolith, this other, this thing. Now we're no longer human. We're a thing, the homeless problem, right? It's changed now from a noun to a verb, or from a noun to an adjective. And I definitely, Sean, I have a chapter in Poverty Scholarship called Linguistic Domination. The way, that words are used and given power, like all our ancestors teach. And it's very important to challenge them. And in the particular way that people are grouped together in a capitalist system, and then by being grouped together, they are no longer considered human. It is extremely important to challenge that. And that's what happens with homelessness and poverty in the US. And also, it's related to shame, which is so important, and why I do the children's books, um, because we need to unpack that shame. Over 62% of children in public schools right now are homeless. I did this book when mom and me lived outside because I needed to show children that there was a different way to think about poverty, both housed children and unhoused children. That we are not a monolith, that we are not a thing, any more than any other group of folks, and that actually we have to be considered human so that we can relate to each other as humans. Homefulness is a homeless people's solution to homelessness. And we're building it right now in Deep East Uchin. And we appreciate people's support. And we teach any other Indigenous or poor folks how to do this. And we also encourage folks to recognize that words do have power. It's why in the Sidewalk Motel, my newest book, I have the potionary. I would urge folks to get it. We need to all check these words before we wreck ourselves.
All right, with Tiny Gray-Garcia, aka Poverty Scholar. Thank you very much for coming through. We will, of course, link to everything in the show notes. And anytime we can be of any support to you and your work and that of your crew, please let us know.
We love you, but I like. We love you.
Likewise, appreciate you.
All
And take good care. Thank you for coming through. Best of luck to you.
You too. Okay, bye bye.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.